So, today, we want to hit that front leg in. That might be helpful. Where's my, both legs. All right. We're looking at solving quadratic equations using square roots. So yesterday, we looked at solving these equations by graphing. This is what the title of the lesson was, right? So like we just talked about, they gave us some quadratic equation. We could throw it on our graph. We would look at where that graph crosses the x-intercept, and then those would be the points that solve that equation, or make it equal to 0. Now today we're going to solve these equations by using square roots. So it will be a little bit different, well, a lot of bit different approach, more of an algebraic approach than like a graphing approach, but we're still working on solving these quadratic equations. So we will be able to solve equations using square roots in the form of ax squared plus c equals 0. So what that means is our quadratic equations have been in this form a lot of times. Oops, not bx squared, just bx. Like this a lot of times. And today we're just going to work on solving them when we don't have that middle value, where we don't have this. So that's all it means by ax squared plus c, is that we won't have that middle value of a number times x. We have a term, some examples, more examples, and then some practice. A couple of things to note before we get started. You don't have to write all of these down. It's just something that we need to recognize. If we have x squared equals 9, how would we go about solving that? X squared equals 9. How would we solve that? Yeah, we would take the square root both sides. Thank you. Square root both sides. X equals the square root of 9, which is what? 3. Pretty straightforward. Now, what it's talking about in this first bullet point is we know that 3 squared, gives us 9. But is there anything else squared that could give us 9? Not. What about negative 3? Negative 3 times negative 3, anything that is squared would end up being a positive number, wouldn't it? Because a negative times a negative is a positive. So what this first bullet point is trying to get at is that if we have a number that is greater than 0, so like just a whole positive number, and we are taking the square root of it, like here, the square root of 9, our answer is the positive version of that root, so positive 3, but our answer would also be x could equal negative 3. All right, so there are two answers that we would have when we are square rooting a number that is greater than 0. We are square rooting a positive number. The way that you will see that written a lot of times is, let's say we're trying to find the square, x squared equals 10. We would square root both sides, just like last time. Do we know what well, off the top of our head, do we know what the square root of 10 is? Is it a nice clean number? No, it's not. So instead of writing it as positive 3 point in that messy decimal and then negative 3 point in that messy decimal, what you'll see a lot of times is they write it as a square root of plus or minus 10. Have you guys seen this plus or minus sign before, or is this our first time seeing it? You have in other places? So all that means is that we are taking root 10 and negative root 10. But it's just a quick way to write it, so you will see that. If our number that we are square rooting is equal to 0, then there is just one solution that we would have. So when it's equal to 0, the square root of 0 is 0. So if any time we come across trying to take the square root of 0, we know that that is just 0. If we are ever trying to square root a negative number, that's what this third bullet point gets at. If we're trying to square root a negative number, that has no solutions, or we cannot do that. You would get an error in your calculator or something, your calculator will freak out. But if we ever see a negative number under the square root sign, then we know that there are no solutions. So, in other words, positive number, any positive number, even if it's a fraction, there are two solutions. If it is 0 under the square root, it just equals 0. And then when there's a negative number under our square root, there are no solutions. We don't like negative numbers in square roots. So this is a classic homework question that you will see. Solve 3x squared minus 27 using square roots. So the first thing that we want to try to do is get that, we need to solve. We need to find what x could equal. So we need to get x by itself. What would our first step be, Abigail? What would our first step be to get x by itself? What? We could start by dividing by 3, but probably first we want to add 27. Okay? We want to take care of addition or subtraction first. So we would have 3x squared equals 27. Now we would divide by 3. X squared equals 9. Now to get rid of this squared, we will square root each side. So x equals the square root of 9, which is what? 3. Positive or negative 3. Yep, positive or negative. Because again, if we look at x squared equals 9, we plug positive 3 in, we will get 9. If we plug negative 3 in, we will still get 9. So we need to remember to put that positive and negative. There are two solutions. And if we graph it, we would see that our graph goes through negative 3 and positive 3. That's a really uneven graph. So we'll loop through both of those points. So it all matches up. We look at another example. First thing we would need to do is add 10 to each side. Yeah, you're already ahead of it. We would square root each side, and the square root of 0 is 0. So that would just be our answer, is 0. X equals 0. Again, we are solving for x. Our first step would be to subtract 11 from both sides. Next, we would divide by 5. So 5 divided by 5 would just give us 1. What? Oh, yeah, thank you. So negative 1. We square root each side. What do we talk about with negative square roots? No solution. We cannot square root a negative. Thanks for throwing that there. Appreciate that participation. No solution. We cannot square root. What that would look like on our graph is that we have something up, probably up here. Or facing, actually it's a negative up front, so facing down. Now this is the last type of example that you will see. Solve using square roots. What would our first step be in a problem like this? What would our first step be? What was that?
Solve the front part.
Solve the front part. You mean the left side? How would we get rid of? I mean, the problem is we have this squared. How do we get rid of that squared? Yeah, we can square root each side. So we have x minus 1 squared equals 25. We square root each side. We're going to square root this whole thing. Amari, do we know the square root of 25? Yeah, just 5. Comes out clean. Now our last step to get x all on its own, add 1 to each side, x equals 6. We went pretty quickly through this. Do you guys have any questions, or do we feel pretty good about square roots? I think you guys have worked with square roots a little bit in the past. Well, not a little bit. We did a couple lessons on square roots last time. So hopefully this isn't anything too foreign. I like that you're excited for Class K, Maya, but we are skipping the Class K for today. I'm just going to give you the worksheet. Unless you are so excited that you want to do it. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, we can skip it. I like the excitement for it. Do we have any questions? I went pretty quick through it because I think you guys are used to working with square roots at this point. But I guess we'll find out when we look at the homework.